Did medieval Christianity suppress the growth of science? Were religion and science each other's enemies, or could one say Christianity had a positive influence on the development of science in the Middle Ages? I'm Quill History, and today we're going to cover the historical relationship between religion and science in medieval Europe. Stay tuned! As mentioned in the video on the 12th century Renaissance, did Western Europe experience an intellectual rebirth shortly after the turn of the 11th century. This included the birth of the medieval university, as well as the rediscovery of the writings of Aristotle, which quickly came to dominate the discussions among medieval intellectual circles. In addition, did the 12th century Renaissance carry with it a rationalistic turn among European thinkers to try to apply the intellect to all areas of human knowledge, including the Bible and theology. One example of this can be seen in the ontological argument developed by the 11th century bishop Anselm of Canterbury. The argument aims to demonstrate the existence of God purely through logical reasoning, and goes something like this. We have the conception of God in our minds as a being greater than any other thing which we can conceive. However, in order for God to be truly the greatest thing we can conceive, he would also have to exist, because if he didn't, he would not be the greatest. A real greatest thing is certainly greater than an imaginary one. Thus, if God did not exist, he would not be the greatest thing we can conceive, and hence, he must exist. It's beyond the scope of this video to assess whether this or the later versions of the ontological argument holds water. What is of interest here, however, is the argument's importance regarding the relationship between religion and science in the Middle Ages. Notice how Anselm attempts to demonstrate a central pillar in Christianity, the existence of God, purely through reason and without any reference to the Bible or church teachings. By doing so, Anselm's main intention with the argument was not to combat unbelief, but rather to show his contemporaries that reason and philosophy were not the enemies of Christianity. Another example on the growing emphasis of reason at this time can be seen in the 12th century philosopher and theologian William of Conches. Among medieval scholars like William, there were a growing tendency to see how far natural principles of causality could be taken in providing a satisfactory explanation of the world. As a prominent medieval thinker, he mocked people who appealed to divine intervention to explain phenomena in nature. Because they are themselves ignorant of the forces of nature and wish to have all men as companions in their ignorance, they are unwilling for anybody to investigate them, but prefer that we believe like peasants and not inquire into the causes of things. While William did not deny that God could perform miracles, he argued God customarily works through natural powers, and that it's the philosopher's task to push these natural powers to their explanatory limits. Since God had created all things except evil, he argued that studying the physical world took nothing away from God, but instead led wise thinkers to appreciate his wisdom, power, and judgment. Reason and science were therefore considered favorable by many European thinkers, if they seemed to support the Christian faith. But what if reason and faith seemed to be in conflict with each other? Should reason trump faith? Should faith trump reason? Or could there exist two different truths at the same time? These questions were of great importance to many medieval thinkers and came to spark controversy at the University of Paris in the 13th century. In year 1210, at the marketplace in Paris, 10 members of a small sect called the Amalricians were burnt at the stake. The members were followers of the philosopher and theologian Amaury of Bean, who had been a teacher at the University of Paris, and who, from his reading of Aristotle, had developed beliefs no Orthodox Christian could accept. Some of these beliefs included pantheism, which is the belief that God and the universe are identical, and he also denied there being any life after death. The discovery of the Amalrician sect confirmed the worst fears of some theologians, that reason and science were used, not to defend Christianity, but to undermine it. Following the burning of the Amalricians, the Bishop of Paris issued a local synod. The synod resulted in many of Aristotle's writings being prohibited from being studied at the faculties of the arts in the University of Paris. It should be noted that the ban only applied to the University of Paris, and that all of the available Aristotelian writings still were read and discussed in Europe's other universities. The ban was in effect for a few decades, but started to lose its impact in the 1240s, partly due to the death of Pope Gregory XI, who had been in favor of the ban, and partly due to pressure from the Parisian arts faculty, who had a growing awareness they were losing ground, as well as reputation through their counterparts at Oxford and other universities. Subsequently, Aristotle slowly started to re-emerge in Paris and became a mandatory part of the education given in the Parisian arts faculty in year 1255. To fully grasp the tensions surrounding the Aristotelian writings in Paris, we need to get an understanding of what aspects of Aristotle's writings that many medieval thinkers took issue with. A prominent feature of Aristotle's thinking is that the world is eternal. This is antithetical to Christianity, which not only holds that the universe is created, but also dependent on God for its existence. Another point of tension is the question of determinism, which is prevalent in Aristotle's philosophy. According to Aristotle, all things contain unchangeable natures, which are the basis of a regular cause and effect sequence. This sequence of cause and effect includes the prime mover, often associated with God in medieval Europe, who, due to his eternally unchanging nature, were considered incapable of intervening in the world. This put heavy restrictions on God's omnipotence and left no room for miracles. A third and final point of conflict was regarding the human soul. According to Aristotle, the human soul refers to the organizing principle of the body, like a system keeping all of the different parts together. When the body dies, the system ceases to exist, leaving no room for a life after death, which goes against the Christian belief in human salvation and eternal life. These were not isolated pieces of philosophy in Aristotle's writings, but manifestations of basic attitudes towards the world, and as a result caused a lot of debate among philosophers and theologians regarding how Aristotle's writings in science and philosophy on one hand and Christianity on the other should relate to each other. The debates were prevalent in the 13th century, and especially at the University of Paris, due to Paris being one of the leading intellectual centers in medieval Europe. In the decades following the re-emergence of Aristotle's writings in the University of Paris, there were different attitudes among Parisian philosophers and theologians regarding how Christianity and Aristotelianism should relate to each other. These attitudes among the philosophers and theologians regarding the relationship between Aristotelianism and Christian theology can generally be divided into three camps. Some thinkers argue that Aristotelian explanations for natural phenomena should be taken as far as possible, without any regard for its theological consequences. One prominent thinker in this camp were the philosopher Sigurd of Brabant. Sigurd never denied the existence of the supernatural, but denied it being within the realm of science and philosophy, and thinkers like him had a tendency to believe there simultaneously could exist one truth within philosophy and another within theology. Other thinkers like Thomas Aquinas and Albertus Magnus rejected this tendency and instead worked to reconcile Aristotelian thinking and the Christian faith, where the two seem to be in conflict. These thinkers argued that philosophy and theology are different spheres with different methodologies. Because of their different methodologies, science and theology could lead to different answers, but never to contradictory answers. Finally, there were more traditional-leaning thinkers who did not appreciate the intermingling between science and theology. They argued that there need to be clear boundaries beyond which Aristotelian thinking were not allowed to go, and they appealed to the church authorities to enforce these boundaries. This would result in two condemnations in year 1270 and 1277 at the University of Paris. The condemnations prohibited the Parisian philosophers and theologians from holding or defending one of 219 theses deemed antithetical to Christianity. The condemnations had an important impact on the relationship between religion and science in Europe throughout the rest of the Middle Ages. Because of this will the content of the condemnations and its impact be covered in detail in part 2 on religion and science in the Middle Ages, where we also will try to summarize the general historical relationship between Christianity and science in medieval Europe. Today, I hope you learned something new about the history of religion and science in the Middle Ages. And don't forget to check out part 2 as soon as it's uploaded, to get a better picture of the relationship between religion and science in medieval Europe.